Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, I help you decide, is that book worth reading over a second breakfast? Or does my dog not understand personal space in the slightest? The answer is maybe on the first one, and definitely on the second one. Can you let me finish my intros, please? You know I'll pet you after I finish, but you have to let me finish first, okay? Alright? Yes, I love you. I love you. Elder Scrolls The Infernal City was released on November 1st of 2009. Written by author Greg Keyes and placed firmly 2 years before Skyrim came out, in terms of publication date. It's actually 60 years after the Oblivion game's narrative. As far as I can find, it appears to be the first of the extended universe novels published within the Elder Scrolls series. That is, it's not merely a game guide or a lore explanation or exploration of what's already in the game. Like, I know they recently released all the Skyrim books in, like, a leather-bound set. But those are books in the game. There isn't too much to speak on in the background of this book, surprisingly, which is unfortunate. But without further ado... Now, normally for my book reviews involving games, I have someone come in and explain the plot and history of the title in order to give my readers better context. In this case, I'm going to decline to do so. Mostly because the Elder Scrolls as a series is mostly disconnected from the series... It's mostly a disconnected series of games, that is to say. You don't need to play Oblivion to understand what's going on in Skyrim. You don't need to play Morrowind to understand what's going on in Oblivion. So on and so forth. While you might appreciate the occasional hint or Easter egg regarding the previous game, at no point does it ever feel necessary to understand the various stories within the world, such as with Halo or the Mass Effect novels. What I will say is that most of what you need to know is that in the game of Oblivion, you're basically helping the mortal realm, known as Mundus, fight off a demonic invasion from a Daedric prince, best equated to like a demon lord from D&D. They want to invade and destroy Mundus, because that's just kind of what this one does. The book has some of the immediate aftermath in it, so like dealing with the realm of Oblivion and the increased awareness of the characters within the realm of Mundus to Oblivion like creatures. But apart from that, it's more of a minor detail. Apart from like some small landmarks here and there that help inform how the world was built afterwards, you don't need to know the plot of Oblivion to read this book. So let's go ahead and just go take a look at the cover, which is great for what it is. The cover features the titular Umbriel, the Infernal City, right on the front. Now, right off the bat, we get a good look on what the inanimate antagonist of the story is, how it looks, the city located atop the floating chunk of rock. It's all very nice. You know, without checking the back, that the story must contain something to do with this floating city, and the title lets you know that obviously this city's not going to be a good thing. The Infernal City, you don't call things infernal and, you know, it's all happy, sunshine, rainbows kind of things. So overall, it's a pretty decent cover. But what's this story about, I hear you ask? Well, I can officially say, once more, at least for this month, that if you're curious to see how this book presents itself, please feel free to check out my TBR video, where I read the back of the book. This is a good way to see how the book thinks is a good idea of what you're going to be delving into. But for a more down and dirty synopsis for the context of this specific review, here we go. Anae, I believe that's actually how I pronounce the name on the back, Anae and her Argonian friend Mirgleam are friends living in the Black Marsh city Lillimoth. However, both find themselves being sucked into the world of Umbriel as the floating island travels over Black Marsh, turning all those who fall into its shadow into corpses, walking not too long after their death. The book mostly follows them, along with the Prince of the Imperial Throne, Atreus, a somewhat vain glory hound at first, as he attempts to mount a defense to rescue Anae from the clutches of this little patch of oblivion, helped by a surly Dunmer named Sol. Also, there's this spy/investigator called Colin in there doing some stuff, but whatever. That about rounds me around to talk about this book. For all intents and purposes, I did enjoy reading this book very much. It was a fun, interesting read that felt nice to tell a tale that doesn't take place during any of the games. Due to that, I can feel like it tells a story that doesn't have to rely on game mechanics and explaining them in the game. Instead of, following a famed warrior who hacks and slashes his way through most of the problems, we can follow the aspiring Breton alchemist as she's conscripted into the kitchens on Umbriel, which is almost like little fiefdoms of kingdoms, fighting for constant control to serve a certain lord. We can watch as the Argonian friend that she's with is hit with grunt work, although accidentally inspiring a workers' revolution through merely being himself, as he brings the idea of treating people who aren't innately born with respect, all without the thin veneer of trying to squeeze it into this combat-oriented RPG game. To sum it down, it's nice to follow characters who don't have to rely on their main mechanic being swing a sword. And don't take that the wrong way. I didn't buy Skyrim 4 fucking times because I hated it. Honestly, I shouldn't have bought it 4 times in the first place, but I was young and stupid and I had the money. But this allows for a more moldable storytelling. More interesting solutions that go beyond hit it really hard with a stick or kill it with fire. And that the games mostly boil down the conflicts into. And I know through the narrative you have things like collect a Daedric artifact in the blood of an Aedra to create a portal into the Cameron. I'm trying to remember that antagonist's name from Oblivion. But into his own little personal paradise. Those are nice narrative implements. Down to the core mechanic, the basic idea is still go here, hack slash survive, get out. Personally, I found Prince Atrebius's Treb plotline the most interesting. A prince who thinks of himself as a famed hero finds out the truth, which completely shatters his confidence and resolve, and has to balance this struggle with a near complete loss of self-worth, while also trying to be the hero he once thought he was for the sake of Anai, a random Breton woman who thought only to call him when she was in danger. I'm very interested in seeing where he goes when it all ends in the next book. There's even a not so subtle hint that he has feelings for Anai, so I see that developing, but I'll talk a little bit more on that in a second. I won't say that these are the deepest characters for the moment, obviously, but I do like them, and I do see how they can be deeper in the next work. You don't want to lay all your cards out on the first book. That being said, as much as I enjoyed this book, there are some things I felt it doesn't do well. I mentioned in my TBR video that one of the things that seemed weird about when I read the back of the book was the fact that despite it listing 4 unique characters, we'd only been introduced to a single one of them, with Mirglim not even getting an interest. Mirglim not even getting a mention on the back. And while I could guess the legendary prince was meant to be Atrebius, the mage and the spy had yet to make an appearance despite, at the time I was reading the back, being about almost halfway. I think I was about 98 pages in, and the book itself was only 284 pages long. I guess it's not really close to halfway, but not really my point here. About 50 pages off halfway. But when you compare that to the average read of about 350 to 400 pages long, you understand that I was a very considerable distance into the book, and they hadn't introduced major characters yet. Now, this means the book didn't have a lot of time in comparison to establish those characters, or their goals, or their personality, or what they're bringing to the story. So I was left with the question of how it was going to do this. The answer is it doesn't. You see, for the spy, Colin gets a grand total of about 3 or 4 chapters, and while he does provide a couple of interesting insights, doesn't actually contribute all that much to the book. All his revelations and insights are revealed just as easily through all the other characters in the book. He doesn't uncover anything that you would not get through these other characters, and as such he feels like a completely pointless addition. At most, he seems to serve solely as a, here's what the Empire is feeling about the current events unfolding. And that's about it. And even then, that's one of those, you can tell that through Atrebius, who makes occasional revisits back to the Empire. To compound, the mage, with a desire for revenge, also dies off a bit. While Sol has a much grander presence in the novel, serving as the savior to Treb and then sort of as a mentor/protective figure to the Prince's travel, there's a bit of an issue. Sol is a side character to the prince's story, not his own character as suggested on the back of the book. While this is much more forgivable than, say, with Colin, who barely had a presence at all, I would still say it's a fault because it presents a character who isn't a main character as one, while leaving Mirglim, a much more major character through the story who even gets his own point of view chapters, on the sideline. It's like he doesn't deserve to be mentioned, but this guy who is solely a side character gets the main character spot. And there are obviously faults in this book aside from this. One of the things I often focus on in regards to when I read expanded universe novels is how approachable they are from people outside the already established fandom. With things like Star Wars, the EU, that's not as big of an issue. I focus more on how well does it stack up to the lore. Because in that world, it's already so well established, it's probably not a good idea to start with the novel. Sometimes I tiff, obviously, like with the Dragons of Autumn Twilight, as my own familiarity with the franchise led me to believe that it expected a typical reader to be way more familiar with the setting than possible, as it was actually the very first book in that setting, period, not even before a module. I think it's a valid way to approach a lot of expanded universe novels, because ultimately this is a different medium than what the mainline canon presents. Not everyone who reads the book will play the games or watch that movie, and vice versa. So you have to anticipate that at least a portion of your market is someone who needs to be clued in to some of the lore from the other side of the market that is important for this book. And this book is not great at that. And that's not even from an inexperienced reader's POV. But even for me, who actually has a fair amount of knowledge in what the Elder Scrolls lore is. I mean, I used to write fan fiction. Remember, I had this whole thing plotted out where I was going to make this major fan fiction connecting story kind of thing, but whatever. Well, I might have been able to excuse a bit of the blasé way that the author just kind of describes Argonian and Khajiit in the way a non-experienced reader wouldn't know what to picture. Like, that person over there is an Argonian. That person over there is a Khajiit. Even a slightly experienced reader would also know that it's a bit harder to establish because the way they look changes between games. But there was also stuff at one point where the author decided to describe the look on someone's face as a Lilmothian expression of agitation. Now, in this book, Lilmoth is a specific city in Blackmarsh in which both Mirglim and Anai are from. Now, in context, to even a fan, we're shown a city we've never been to, in a country we've never visited in the games, and being told, without further context, to picture a specific facial expression. You see how that doesn't quite work when it comes to the visualization you want to create for your reader. I'm also not a big fan of the way this book decides to end. Not just because of the nature of the cliffhanger itself that it ends with, but it feels a bit too abrupt. It felt almost like the author wanted to end it one way, but as he was in the final stages of writing it, a studio exec walked by and said, no, you need to change that. Personally, I was a little disappointed because I think our main characters would have been better off combining together into a group for the next book, especially since the book keeps hinting that Prince Atrevius and Anai are gonna have a romance kindling up, or at least maybe a one-sided infatuation on Treb's side, but I think it would have been good to have that where they meet up so they can actually talk to each other, get to know each other, that kind of thing. So I don't feel that it was great to keep them separated. Apart from that, I think, it would have been more interesting to see the various personalities bounce off each other in a larger group. Sol and Mirglim would have been an interesting duo to put together, whereas it would also be nice to see Anai's personality reflect off the much more cynical, pragmatic Sol. So, in the end, I guess I'd have to grant this book about a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Now, that's not to say the book is terrible. Actually, surprisingly, a lot of the discourse online seems to not like this book at all. I'm not really sure why. Well, I've read a couple of the bad reviews, but I don't... I think they're a little unfair to the book. I don't think this book is nearly as bad as a lot of what you see online. And I also say that in ignorance of what the next book holds, obviously. That might completely change my opinion on this book. But I think this book has enough fun characters, an interesting enough story to hold on to an attention. Like I said, there are some faults of it, but I don't think the faults are very strong. When it comes to the question of whether or not it deserves Mount Doom, the answer is no. And that's also mostly just because, I mean, hey, it does what it sets out to do. It's like, again, I feel like when I read online, I read all these negative reviews, people expecting this book to be a lot more than it could have been. But that's for another day. With that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones. See you later, everyone.